You're nothing without this family." That's what my brother hissed at me that night. 10 years of invisible labor, and they have the nerve to call me the traitor? Funny how they only noticed I existed once their precious restaurant started bleeding customers. Let me show you how I burned it all down. Let's start at the beginning. Mom, you have to talk some sense into her. She's going to destroy everything we've built. My brother Marco's voice crackled through my mother's phone speaker. Loud enough for me to hear from across the kitchen, where I was slicing vegetables with practiced precision, my knife hitting the cutting board in rhythmic thuds. I kept my eyes down, focusing on the carrots beneath my blade instead of the conversation happening 10 feet away. After 15 years of working in the family restaurant, I'd become an expert at appearing not to listen while catching every word. "Elena, are you really going through with this?" Mom's voice was soft but strained, the way it always got when she was caught between her children. She approached the prep station, her fingers nervously twisting the gold band she still wore years after Dad's passing. I set my knife down and looked up at her. "I signed the lease yesterday." In all my 32 years, I had never seen disappointment flash so quickly across my mother's face. She masked it almost immediately, but it was there, clear as the recipe cards I'd handwritten and organized in the metal box beside the industrial stove. The recipe cards no one but me ever referenced, though Marco took credit for every specialty dish we served. "We should discuss this as a family," she said, her accent thickening the way it did when she was upset. "We already did, 3 times. I wiped my hands on my apron. No one listened. The weight of unspoken words hung between us in the steam-filled kitchen. I could almost see them floating among the aromatic vapors rising from the pots of simmering sauces I'd been tending since dawn. Words like ungrateful, selfish, abandonment. Words I'd been bracing myself against for weeks as I secretly planned my escape. I'd been 14 when Dad first put me to work in Rosetta's, the restaurant he'd named after my grandmother. I started washing dishes, then prepping vegetables, then cooking alongside him, while Marco, 3 years older, charmed the customers out front. By the time I was 20, I could replicate every dish Dad made, sometimes improving them in ways that made him beam with pride. "You have the gift, Elena," he'd say, tapping my nose with a flour-dusted finger. "The true heart of a chef." When Dad died suddenly of a heart attack, I was 23. Marco was 26 with a business degree and what Mom called your father's charisma. He took over as the face of Rosetta's while I inherited the kitchen. It seemed natural then. I couldn't imagine fighting Marco for the spotlight, not when I was drowning in grief and the comfort of the kitchen was the only thing keeping me afloat. I threw myself into the work, expanding our menu, sourcing better ingredients, keeping our books balanced even as Marco's promotional ideas drained our margins. I worked 14-hour days, 6 days a week. I missed friends' weddings, canceled dates, postponed my own culinary school dreams. Rosetta's became my identity, my purpose, my prison. And through it all, I remained invisible. Elena's just helping out while she figures out what she wants to do. Marco would tell food critics who wandered into the kitchen, praising the braised short ribs or the handmade pasta. "My son has revolutionized traditional Italian cuisine," Mom would boast to her friends at church, never mentioning the daughter who'd created every recipe on the menu. I became a ghost in my own life, watching as Marco was featured in the local magazine's 30 Under 30 list for his culinary innovation, using photos of dishes I had created, plated, and even styled for the photographer. Each night, I'd return to my small apartment, hands raw from hot water and knife work, back aching from hours of standing. I'd look in the mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back, eyes dulled by exhaustion, shoulders permanently hunched as if carrying an invisible burden. Sometimes I'd wonder what Dad would think if he could see how his beloved restaurant had divided his children instead of uniting them. The breaking point came a year ago during the Regional Restaurant Awards. Marco had insisted we enter, convinced we would win Best Italian Restaurant. I spent weeks perfecting our submission dishes, testing variations until my fingers were raw and my back ached from standing over the stove. When they called Rosetta's as the winner, Marco bounded onto the stage alone. I watched from our table, still in my chef's coat, because I'd been finalizing desserts until the last minute. "This means everything to me," Marco said into the microphone, clutching the crystal trophy. "My vision for Rosetta's has always been to honor our family traditions while pushing boundaries. My vision, my boundaries, my. Later that night, as we closed up the restaurant, I found the trophy perched on the bar. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my hands. "Where should I put this?" I asked Marco, who was counting the night's earnings. He glanced up. "Oh, just in the display case up front. Make sure it's centered." "Shouldn't it go in the kitchen?" I asked quietly. "That's where it was earned." Marco laughed, the sound grating against my frayed nerves. "Don't be silly, Elena. No one can see it back there. Just like no one could see me." I set the trophy down with deliberate care, though what I really wanted was to hurl it against the wall, to shatter it into 1,000 glittering pieces, one for each time I'd been overlooked, diminished, erased. Instead, I untied my apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the bar next to the trophy. "I'm taking tomorrow off," I said. Marco barely looked up. "Fine, but be in early the next day. We've got that catering prep to start." It was the first time in 4 years I'd asked for an unscheduled day off. He didn't even ask why. I spent my unexpected day of freedom walking the downtown streets of our mid-sized city, studying storefronts, peering through windows of vacant spaces. I found myself in front of a "For Lease" sign on a corner building with large windows and worn brick. Something stirred in me as I cupped my hands against the glass and peered inside, a feeling I hadn't experienced since I was a teenager helping Dad experiment with new recipes. Possibility. I called the number on the sign that same afternoon. I signed the lease for my cafe space on a Tuesday morning in spring, when the cherry blossoms along Main Street were just beginning to unfurl. The space was small, barely 8 tables and a counter, but the kitchen was well designed, and the large windows let in streams of natural light that made the worn wooden floors glow golden. I hadn't told my family I was looking. I hadn't told them I'd been squirreling away money for years, building a modest savings account that now held enough for 6 months of rent and basic renovations. I hadn't told them I'd been developing my own recipes on my one day off each week, testing them on friends who'd become my most enthusiastic champions. I named my cafe Visible. The day I turned in my resignation at Rosetta's, Marco laughed in my face, certain I was bluffing. "You'll be back in a month when you realize running a restaurant isn't as easy as cooking in one," he said dismissively. Mom cried, invoking Dad's memory, asking repeatedly what she had done wrong to make me want to leave. "This isn't about you," I told her gently, though my resolve was weakening under the weight of her tears. "This is about me, needing to create something of my own." "Your father would be so disappointed," she whispered, delivering the blow she knew would hurt most. I absorbed the pain, letting it settle alongside the years of accumulated slights and dismissals. "I think Dad would understand better than anyone," I replied. "He left his family's construction business to open Rosetta's, remember? Against everyone's wishes." She had no response to that. The first person I hired was Jade, a talented pastry chef I'd met at a food exhibition 3 years earlier. She'd been working at a hotel restaurant where her creativity was stifled by rigid menus and corporate oversight. "I can't pay you what you're worth yet," I told her honestly as we sat in my half-finished space, surrounded by paint swatches and equipment catalogs. "You're offering me freedom?" she replied, her eyes bright with excitement. "That's worth more than money right now." We opened on a Thursday with little fanfare, just a hand-painted sign and a menu of 5 perfectly executed dishes. By Saturday, there was a line out the door, thanks to a local food blogger who'd stumbled in on our first day and raved about my roasted vegetable tart with handmade ricotta. For the first time in my professional life, I heard my name spoken with respect and admiration. "Chef Elena, this is incredible," customers would say, making direct eye contact, acknowledging my existence, my contribution, my vision. Each time it happened, I felt a small piece of my long-diminished self return, like scattered fragments of a mosaic slowly being reassembled. I didn't hear from my family for 2 weeks after opening day. Then Mom called, her voice tight. "Marco lost the Bergman wedding contract," she said without preamble. "They found out you're not cooking at Rosetta's anymore." My hands stilled on the dough I was kneading. The Bergmans were longtime customers whose daughter had booked her wedding reception at Rosetta's almost a year in advance, specifically requesting my butternut squash ravioli and braised lamb. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it. "I never wanted Rosetta's to fail. You need to come back and talk to them. Tell them you'll oversee their menu personally." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of obligation settling on my shoulders. The guilt was visceral, a physical ache that radiated from my chest into my limbs. In my family, loyalty was the highest virtue, and I had committed the ultimate sin by prioritizing my own needs above theirs. Then I looked around at my kitchen, with its gleaming counters and the staff I'd handpicked, who were now watching me with concerned expressions. This was what I had built with my own hands, my own talent, my own vision. This was my declaration of self-worth after years of invisibility. "I can't do that, Mom. I have my own business now." "This is your business," her voice cracked. "Rosetta's is your legacy, your father's legacy." "No," I said softly, realizing the truth as I spoke it. "Rosetta's is Marco's business. It always has been. Visible is mine." She hung up without saying goodbye. The rumors started a week later. A supplier mentioned that Marco was telling people I had stolen family recipes. A former regular at Rosetta's came into Visible and awkwardly asked if it was true that I'd left the family restaurant over a romantic rivalry with Marco's fiancée, a story so absurd I nearly laughed in her face. Then came the cease and desist letter, claiming that my signature dish, a modern take on my grandmother's arancini recipe, was proprietary to Rosetta's and demanding I remove it from my menu. I called Marco directly. "This is ridiculous," I said when he answered. "Nana taught me that recipe when I was 12. It's not even on Rosetta's menu." "It's a family recipe," he replied coolly, "and you're using it to compete against family." "I'm not competing with you, Marco. Our restaurants aren't even in the same category. Tell that to the Bergmans and the Millers and the community center that just canceled their standing monthly order." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. Those clients asked for me specifically. I can't help that. "You could have stayed where you belonged." His voice rose sharply. "Dad built Rosetta's for all of us, and you just walked away." "Dad built Rosetta's to create something of his own," I countered, surprising myself with my steadiness. "That's all I'm trying to do." "By destroying what he created?" Marco's voice broke, and for the first time, I heard genuine fear beneath his anger. "We're down 30%, Alina. Mom is talking about taking out another mortgage." My stomach twisted. I never meant to hurt the restaurant. "Then come back. 3 days a week. We'll put your name on the menu, give you credit." For a fleeting moment, I considered it. The thought of Mom facing financial strain made my chest ache. But then I remembered all the times I'd compromised myself for their comfort, all the years I'd spent being the invisible support beam holding everyone else up. "I can't do that," I said finally. "But I'll help you find and train a new chef, someone good." "It's not about finding someone good," Marco snapped. "It's about loyalty. It's about family." "Family works both ways," I said, a lifetime of unspoken truth suddenly rising to my lips. "When was the last time either of you showed loyalty to me? When did either of you fight for what I needed?" There was a long silence. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "When your little cafe fails, and it will, don't expect to come back to open arms." The threat hung in the air between us, a final attempt to manipulate me back into my assigned role. But for once, I didn't feel the crushing weight of familial expectation. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar but exhilarating, the lightness of standing fully in my truth. "I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed on someone else's," I told him before hanging up. That night, I sat alone in my cafe after closing, watching the moonlight spill across the tables I'd found at estate sales and refinished myself. I thought about my brother's words, about the fear of failure that had kept me tethered to Rosetta's for so long. But for the first time, failure didn't seem like the worst possible outcome. Living a life of quiet erasure, of constant diminishment, that was the true failure I couldn't bear any longer. My cafe didn't fail. 6 months after opening, we had a waiting list for weekend brunches and had expanded to dinner service 3 nights a week. I hired 2 more chefs and a dedicated front-of-house manager. For the first time in my adult life, I took 2 consecutive days off and spent them wandering through a farmer's market without checking my phone every 5 minutes. Rosetta struggled. I heard about it through the grapevine. Suppliers who served both our establishments, mutual acquaintances in the restaurant world. They'd cut back their hours, simplified their menu. Marco had taken over the kitchen himself, with mixed results. Meanwhile, the campaign against me intensified. A health inspector showed up 3 times in 1 month, citing anonymous complaints. My suppliers began receiving calls questioning the quality of my ingredients. A nasty review appeared online claiming food poisoning, posted by an account created that same day with no previous activity. I knew who was behind it all, but confronting Marco would only escalate the situation. Instead, I focused on excellence. Every dish that left my kitchen was perfect. Every customer received personal attention. I documented everything meticulously to counter any false claims. Then came the letter from a lawyer representing Rosetta's, demanding immediate payment for equipment and inventory removed without authorization. Things I'd purchased with my own money years ago. It included a list of small wares, from my personal knife set to specialty cake molds I'd bought for holiday desserts. Mom showed up at Visible on a Tuesday afternoon a week after I received the letter. She looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched as she slid into the corner table. I approached warily, coffee pot in hand. "I didn't know about the lawyer," she said without preamble, refusing to meet my eyes. "Marco did that on his own." I sat down across from her, something I rarely allowed myself to do during service. "You never told me Nana had her own restaurant." Mom nodded, looking around the sunlit space. "Just a tiny place, 6 tables. She lost it when she married your grandfather and came to America. His family needed help with their restaurant, and that became her life instead." The parallel wasn't lost on me. Did she regret it? Mom's eyes met mine, suddenly bright with unshed tears. She never said, but sometimes I would catch her looking at old photographs, and there was such longing in her face. She reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm proud of you, Elena. I should have said that sooner." The words I'd waited a lifetime to hear washed over me, healing places I hadn't realized were still wounded. "Thank you," I whispered, my vision blurring. "Your father would be proud too," she added. "He always said you were the one with the real talent." I blinked away tears. "He never told me that." "He thought you knew," Mom said simply. "He thought everyone could see what was obvious to him." We sat in silence for a moment, the air between us charged with decades of misunderstandings and missed connections. I realized then that my mother hadn't been complicit in my erasure out of malice, but out of a blind spot common to parents who believe they treat their children equally when they don't. "I wish I'd stood up for myself sooner," I admitted. "Maybe things would be different now." Mom squeezed my hand. "Maybe. Or maybe you needed to follow this exact path to become who you are now. Sometimes the longest route is the only one that gets you where you truly need to be." The next 6 months were the hardest. The legal threats continued, with Marco's lawyer finding increasingly creative ways to harass me. A rumor circulated that I'd stolen proprietary recipes. Former Rosetta's employees were pressured not to work for me. Meanwhile, Visible thrived. We expanded to dinner service, and I hired 2 more chefs. Local media noticed the striking disparity between the siblings' restaurants, one rising, one falling. The narrative wrote itself. Underappreciated female chef emerges from brother's shadow. Marco hated it. Mom stopped visiting altogether, caught in her impossible position between children. A year and a half after opening Visible, I received a text from Marco. "We need to talk. In person. No lawyers." I met him at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between our restaurants. He looked hollowed out, the confident swagger replaced by slumped shoulders and shadows under his eyes. "We're selling Rosetta's," he said after tense greetings. "I wanted you to hear it from me." Though I'd been expecting this, the finality hit me hard. "Who's buying it?" "A restaurant group from Chicago. They're keeping the name, some signature dishes." I nodded, unsure what to say. Part of me felt profound sadness at the thought of our family restaurant changing hands. Another part, a part I wasn't entirely proud of, felt vindicated. "When does it happen?" I asked, my voice deliberately neutral. "Final papers next week. Last service is Friday." He looked up from his untouched coffee. I wanted to ask, to demand, no, to request. He struggled with the words. Would you consider coming for the final night? I felt my jaw tighten. Why would I do that? After everything? Because it's still Dad's place. His voice cracked slightly. Because, despite everything, you loved it once. You're asking me to help you save face, I countered, to give your customers one final taste of what they've been missing. Yes, he admitted bluntly. That's exactly what I'm asking. His honesty caught me off guard. Marco had never been one to admit vulnerability. I'll think about it, I said, which was more than I'd planned to give him. He nodded, accepting this small concession. As we prepared to leave, he hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. They offered me a management position at one of their other locations. Will you take it? I don't know. He looked genuinely lost. For so long, my identity has been tied to being the face of Rosetta's. I'm not sure who I am without that. I knew exactly how that felt, but offered no comfort. The bridge between us remained badly damaged, perhaps beyond repair. I spent the week in turmoil, torn between the satisfaction of letting Marco face the consequences of his actions and the pull of 15 years spent in that kitchen. In the end, it wasn't about Marco at all. It was about saying goodbye to a place that had formed me, for better or worse. On the last night Rosetta's operated as a family restaurant, I arrived an hour before service. The dining room was being prepared for a full house, longtime customers coming for one final meal, one last taste of what our family had built. I slipped in through the back door, the one I'd used thousands of times. The kitchen was in chaos. Food prepped incorrectly. Station setups disorganized. Marco barking orders that contradicted each other. Two-line cooks looked ready to walk out. I stood silently in the doorway, watching the mayhem. Part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, felt satisfied. This was what happened when you pushed away the person who actually knew how things worked. Marco spotted me and froze mid-sentence. For a moment, neither of us moved. The kitchen staff followed his gaze, and a collective silence fell over the space. I found myself remembering why I'd loved this work before it became a burden. The choreography of a kitchen in full flow, the immediate gratification of creating something that brought joy. As the final desserts went out, Marco approached my station. The Sirianos want to see the chef, he said quietly. Both chefs. The Sirianos had been coming to Rosetta's for 20 years, celebrating every anniversary at the same corner table. I wiped my hands and followed Marco out to the dining room. There she is, Mr. Siriano exclaimed when he saw me. The secret weapon all along. Took us long enough to figure it out, his wife added, smiling warmly at me. Your new place is wonderful, Elena, but we've missed your tiramisu. I helped her perfect that recipe. Marco interjected automatically, then caught himself. Actually, no, that's not true. He looked at me, a lifetime of competition in his eyes. Elena created that one entirely. I just took the credit. The admission hung in the air, so unexpected I couldn't formulate a response. Well, Mrs. Siriano said, breaking the stunned silence, whoever made it, it's been a highlight of our lives for 15 years. Back in the kitchen, as the last customers filtered out and the staff began cleaning, Marco approached me at the sink where I was washing my knives, the same professional set I'd been using since culinary school. Thank you, he said simply. Tonight wouldn't have happened without you. I dried my hands and turned to face him. It felt good, being back in this kitchen one last time. He nodded, looking around at the space that had defined our family for so long. Then, with visible effort, I'm sorry, Elena, for all of it. The words I'd waited years to hear landed softer than expected. I was terrified, he continued when I didn't respond. Terrified that everyone would realize you were the talented one. That I was just... He struggled to find the words. The front man, the empty suit. You weren't, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. You built the business side. You brought people through the door. But you kept them coming back. He met my eyes directly. I knew it. Dad knew it. I just couldn't admit it. As I prepared to leave, Mom intercepted me near the door, pressing a small, heavy object into my hands. It was the Crystal Award from the regional restaurant competition, the one that had once symbolized everything I'd lost. This belongs to you, she said firmly. It always did. I started to protest, but she shook her head. Take it, Elena. Put it somewhere visible. From his position behind her, Marco nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement long overdue. The award sits on a shelf in my cafe now, not as a reminder of what was taken from me, but as a testament to what I've reclaimed. Marco comes in for lunch occasionally, sitting at the counter where he can watch me work, learning to appreciate what he once took for granted. Mom helps out on busy weekends, her natural hospitality making customers feel like family. We're healing, slowly finding new ways to exist in each other's lives, not as the roles we were assigned, but as the people we're becoming. I'm learning that setting boundaries isn't betrayal, that claiming my worth doesn't diminish anyone else's. Most importantly, I'm learning that being seen, truly seen, begins with having the courage to step out of the shadows I've grown comfortable hiding in. At Visible, I'm no longer just the helper, the support, the ghost behind someone else's success. Here, in this small space I've created from nothing but determination and long-deferred dreams, I am finally completely visible.